Hello, welcome to the video and welcome to Bonaire. I've made a few videos about the less well-known places I've visited and generally speaking they've not done very well. But Bonaire is such a beautiful place and I got some attractive footage of my time there, so I've decided to make a video about the island even if no one ever watches it. So if that sounds good, stick around! Hi, I'm Matt. I've lived in 5 countries on 4 continents. I've flown over 1.4 million miles. I've visited over 100 countries, every American state, but I'm nowhere near done. So subscribe to see where I go next and perhaps get some inspiration for your next trip. So where is Bonaire? It's in the southernmost part of the Caribbean Sea, only about 50 miles off the coast of Venezuela. With only 22,000 residents, it's a special municipality of the Netherlands, a status shared with St Eustatius and Saba. Its neighbours, Aruba and Curacao, are both constituent countries of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, and those 3 islands are collectively known as the ABC Islands. I'd been to Aruba and Curacao on a cruise, so when I spotted a good value redemption on KLM, I was able to complete my ABCs. I traded in 42,000 Virgin miles for a business class flight down, which I reviewed in this video. Bonaire is lovely, but in some ways it's a bit odd. You arrive into Flamingo Airport and need to pay, or show proof of payment, of the $75 tourist tax. Beware that there seem to be some websites that charge you more than that for providing the service of paying the tax. You should only pay the $75. It's not something the airline collects as part of the ticket, and KLM didn't do a particularly good job of warning passengers about it. And it also brings up quirky Bonaire thing number 1, in that despite being part of the Netherlands, the currency in use is the US dollar. The second oddity is that there is no public transport on the island. No buses, certainly no trains, and very few taxis too. I was able to grab one when I arrived to get me to my hotel, but getting a taxi at other times can be quite tricky. Note also that they don't take credit cards, so make sure you have some dollars on you when you arrive. All of this means that you will need to rent a car. I had booked a car for the latter part of my stay, as I didn't fancy picking it up straight off the plane. Bonaire isn't your typical Caribbean island. It has no real beaches, so doesn't draw in the tourists in the way its neighbours do. It does though offer excellent diving, with many dive sites accessible from the shore. Not needing a boat makes diving very inexpensive, and there were lots and lots and lots of dive shops. Almost every large vehicle I saw had racks for oxygen tanks in the back. You are asked to buy a $40 nature tag to enjoy the oceans, which creates the odd situation where you could theoretically be fined if you went into the ocean for a swim without having bought a tag. The coastal views are spectacular, but close to the capital, houses mostly hog the coastline, although there are a couple of spots where you can still access the water. The capital is Kralendijk, where about half the island's residents live. It's got some restaurants and shops, but it's not exactly a metropolis. Cruise ships do dock here, so there is, of course, a highly Instagrammable sign for you to stand beside. Kralendijk was either too long, or they thought more people would recognise the name Bonaire. It can be quite expensive to eat out though, as so much has to be flown or shipped in. Drinks were particularly pricey. This 250ml bottle of beer was wonderfully cold and refreshing, but it was the equivalent of £9 a pint. I had dinner in a Cuban restaurant in Kralendijk and it was very nice. The second major town on the island is Rincon, although I didn't record much of it beyond this sign. With the benefit of a car, I was able to circumnavigate the island, and there is some interesting stuff to see. The Dutch government has formally apologised for its involvement in slavery. A large number of slaves were owned by the Dutch state and worked in the salt trade on Bonaire. You picture the Caribbean as being lush and full of palm trees, but this far south it's much more of a desert climate, and Bonaire has vast salt flats which were exploited using slave labour. These markers signal to the trading ships where different grades of salt could be collected, and these huts were used by the slaves to camp in when working. Bonaire is still part of the Netherlands in the same way as Rotterdam or Eindhoven, and there is some uneasiness about this arrangement. I did see some graffiti that objected to the continued Dutch ownership of the island. The coastline is also made up of large mangrove forests, and the east side of the island has choppier water, which is a well-known windsurfing destination. If you're planning to drive all the way around the island, be aware that some of the roads are one way. You need to zoom into Google pretty far to see which ones. Bonaire is also home to some interesting wildlife. The airport's named after the flamingos, and there are plenty of them to be seen in the south of the island. That name was a better choice than calling it Donkey Airport. There are hundreds of wild donkeys roaming the island, and they have learned not to be scared of the roads, so drive carefully. There's also a very large donkey sanctuary that you can visit, although I chose not to. Other wildlife I spotted included quite a few lizards and some of the biggest fish I've ever seen from shore. This really would be a good place to go diving, based on what I could see from the quayside in Kralendijk. I stayed at the resort Bonaire, which was located a little way south of the main town of Kralendijk, which wasn't wildly convenient given the lack of public transport, but it was well priced at around £70 a night. And like the island it's located on, the hotel was a little odd. I need to tell you two stories, but I don't have enough B-roll to cover them, so over to me. Hello! So I arrived at the property after about 10 PM, checked in, found my room, and as you often do after a long flight, I went straight to the bathroom. And when I was done, I went to wash my hands, and there was no soap. Now I assumed that this was just a housekeeping oversight, so the next morning I went to reception to ask for some soap. And they told me they don't provide it. But I could buy some at a supermarket that was about a 5-minute walk away from the property. So I walked 5 minutes up the road, spent 75 cents on some soap, walked 5 minutes back down the road and was able to wash my hands. Now those of you with good memories will recall that just a couple of years ago there was this global health scare thing which really got in the way of things for a good couple of years. There were lots of controversial bits of advice thrown around as to what you should do, but the one thing that I think was pretty well understood to be uncontroversial was that you should frequently wash your hands. In fact, I don't remember visiting a hotel anywhere in the world over the last 3 years where you've been able to walk more than 3 or 4 paces without colliding with a hand sanitizer dispenser. But at the resort Bonaire, hand washing is obviously not a thing, which I found to be quite an astonishing attitude to take. I also had a billing issue. Now I booked through hotels.com and for some reason the payment hadn't interfaced correctly into the hotel system. It's not a particularly big deal, but it's not really my problem to fix. But I went to the reception desk that first morning to get it fixed and was told that only the manager could do it, but that they'd stepped away for a short time, so I should come back in an hour. I went back in an hour, was told the same. I went back in another hour, was told the same. On my 4th visit, the receptionist had changed and they said, oh, the manager's not in. They've not been in and they're not going to be in for another 3 days. It was extremely odd to have been told 3 times that the manager was around but had just stepped away, and I wasted quite a lot of time hanging around the property trying to get this fixed, when the manager wasn't on the property at all. I never got to the bottom of what was going on, but the manager did actually unexpectedly show up shortly afterwards and was able to fix it, but they couldn't really explain why the receptionist had continually lied to me. All about something that really wasn't my problem in the first place. So I've never done this before, but I really cannot recommend that you stay at the resort Bonaire if you visit the island. And if you do, take your own soap. One last attraction of the island, if you're a plane spotter like me, is that you can simulate the experience to be had at the end of the runway on St Martin. Bonaire's runway threshold is a little further away from the road and there are far fewer aircraft movements, but it's still good fun. The island only offers direct flights to 4 US cities, with a couple of options to Amsterdam, so it's not actually that easy to get to, which I guess makes it all the more exclusive. I liked Bonaire despite all of its quirks. I do still have my PADI scuba diving licence, although it has been well over a decade since I last used it, but I could do a lot worse than heading back to Bonaire to get back under the water. If I do go back, I'd stay much closer to Kralendijk and would rent a car for the entire duration of my stay, and I'd probably pack some soap, just in case. So thanks for watching, like, comment and subscribe, and I'll see you all in the next one. Goodbye.